Happy Wednesday, girls. I am so excited to be talking to you guys today because we are finishing what we kind of started in the last episode of All the Single Ladies with Let's Grow Girls. I don't know if y'all remember. If you haven't listened, don't worry if you haven't. This is not going to quote unquote piggyback off of the last episode. But if you did listen to last week's episode, then you know I left off wanting to get into something and really excited about getting into something. But then I last minute was like, you know what? This deserves its own episode. So here we are making it its own episode. And today we are talking about Ruth. And I'm really excited about this because I was talking to my husband about what we were going to be discussing this week on the podcast. And I said, there's so many different elements to Ruth, the story about Ruth and Naomi. And honestly, what we're talking about today, I wouldn't even say is like super foundational to the story of Ruth, but I think there are some things that we can glean from that story as women who are following God and as women who are navigating singleness and navigating all the waters of dating. And so I was praying so much to the Lord about this episode because I was like, God, where is an example of singleness or dating in the Bible? Because, dating is such a slang term. It's a term that we kind of just invented back in the times of Jesus, back in biblical times. Things were a lot different. It wasn't really called dating. There was no you know what I mean? Like the Bible doesn't necessarily verbatim say this is how you date in a way that honors God. But the Bible is alive and active and sharper than any double-edged sword. And what we know when we say that is that it is always relevant. It is alive. It is always applicable. And although it may not talk about exactly the thing that we're wanting it to talk about, like we might not get a specific of, hey, this is exactly how you date. This is exactly how you navigate singleness. The Bible holds wisdom, and God is wisdom. And so what we know is that if we live according to the Bible and in the ways that the Lord calls us to live, that we can navigate through these modern day situations, these modern day problems, issues, and challenges, and we can do it with wisdom, and we can do it in faith, and we can do it in a way that honors God because He has given us everything we need for godliness and holiness with His word. And so what popped into my head when I was praying, the Lord just kept kind of putting Ruth there. And I just kept brushing it aside because I was like, that's just not, no. Like, that's not, no. So then I read Ruth and just had a refresher and was like, man, what am I missing? What am I not seeing about this story? And so today I just want to talk about how Ruth navigated singleness. And it feels weird to be using her as an example because she was actually a Moabite woman. So Ruth was not a Christian, if you will. Ruth did not serve God. Ruth was a Moabite, and she found the Lord through her mother-in-law, Naomi. And the way that this happened was Naomi, her husband passed away and both of her sons passed away. And her two sons' wives were committed to her. And one of them went back to be with her father. And Naomi told the girls, hey, you have no reason to stay with me. I'm going to go back to my hometown. I don't want you guys to miss out on life. I'm just paraphrasing here. But you need to go back and be with your families. And I'm going to go back to my people. I'm going to go back to the land where I came from. And Naomi found herself in a situation with a daughter-in-law, Ruth, who was like, no, I am committed to you. I am staying with you. I will be among your people. I will make your people my people, and I will serve your God. I will make your God my God. And I think what really stood out to me about Ruth, and just reflecting and reading it back, and what I want to talk to you girls with today, is that Ruth was so loyal and faithful. And she was almost like a kid, just looking for somewhere to put her faithfulness, looking for somewhere to put her obedience, looking for somewhere to put her loyalty. And she gave it to Naomi without Naomi even asking. And Ruth is in this situation where her husband has died. She's alone. She's navigating singleness again. And I know I don't want to be ignorant. It was another time, it was another age, it was a whole different kind of situation, and they didn't really call dating or singleness, but Ruth was a widow. And I think that's why I thought it wasn't applicable, because I was like, well, God, I'm not really talking about being, a widow, but it is another form of singleness. Singleness is a season, whether no matter how you got there or how you're in it or if you're in it again, singleness is a season without a spouse, without a significant other. And so Ruth was in a season of singleness, and she was looking for somewhere to place her faith, to place her obedience. And she found and saw Naomi. And so she followed Naomi back to her hometown. And I think what the other thing that stood out to me about Ruth is that she was always just faithful to the thing in front of her. Like she was so good at just doing the next best thing, doing the next best thing, doing the next best thing. And she took Naomi at her word and she trusted her. And so when her and Naomi got back to their land, Naomi, it's a lot to get into, but her people kind of shunned her, kind of shamed her, because she left and married a Moabite man. And so Naomi is coming back to a people that's not necessarily being warm and welcoming to her. And she also brought a Moabite woman with her. And so if you can picture this in your head, these people are turning up their noses like, what is she doing back? And why did she bring this woman with her? But Ruth, man, she put her head down and she looked at what needed to be done and she did it. And they needed food, so she went out and provided it. She went out and found a way to get it. And in doing this, she gleaned food from a man's field named Boaz. And for those of you who don't know this story, Boaz kind of ends up being this almost like, just if you could describe chivalry, you could say the definition is Boaz, like in this chapter and in this story. And so Boaz was related to Naomi, and Ruth went and worked in his fields to glean food, to get what they needed, to provide for Naomi. And they were staying in a cave at this time. And Ruth wasn't fixated on the boy, but she was fixated on doing what she needed to do and being faithful in the way that she needed to be faithful and knew how to the thing right in front of her. And then came along Boaz. And Naomi was kind of doing a little matchmaking the whole time, but she wanted Ruth to be married to Boaz. She wanted Ruth to be given away to Boaz. And back in those times, there's a lot of, I'm not even going to get into all the weeds of it, because if I'm being quite honest, I didn't study up on that part of the story as much. But back in those times, when you were a widow, it was normal that if there were brothers, if there was family, if there were cousins, that you would be, as a wife, you would be given to the next in line, in a sense, if you will, the next relative, so that widow would be taken care of. And it's a way to honor the men who had passed away, and the family that had lost. And so Naomi is related to Boaz, this man who owns this field. And if you read Ruth, which you should, by the way, it's so good, Boaz noticed Ruth pretty quickly. He noticed her, which makes me think she was probably a beautiful girl. But something Ruth didn't do is she didn't peacock. She didn't go out of her way to get Boaz's attention. She was just doing what she was supposed to be doing. She was just being faithful to the thing in front of her. She was just doing the next best thing. And I think more often than not today, as girls, we get insecure and we get worried and we get caught up with everything around us and the world around us, and we think that we need to do more, and we think that we need to, in a sense, peacock for a guy. We need to show off. We need to do more of this or do less of that, or do more of this or do less of that. And I think we get so wrapped up in chasing the boy and looking for the boy and getting the boy that we spend so much time doing that we kind of make the boy an idol. And what I love about what I see in Ruth is that she was just doing her thing. like she was just, and people say, man, when you meet that person, or when you meet your husband, when you meet your future husband, like they just come out of nowhere. Like it just happens and you just didn't even see it coming, and it's when you least expect it. And I think the reason it feels that way is because you were just being faithful to what you were supposed to be doing. And I can honestly say that even with my husband now, like, I didn't say yes to camp with him in my sights to meet him. I didn't go back to serve at camp to marry him and be wed to him and meet him. I just kept saying yes to the things that God was putting in front of me to be faithful. And then I looked up, and literally one day I was like, whoa, here's this man, and he's incredible, and he loves God, and he's kind of cute, and I don't know how we got here, but here we are. And I think that that's kind of the whole point, is I didn't know how we got to where we got. And quite frankly, at that time, if you ask anybody who knew me back then, they would say, like, it really freaked me out. Like, I was not ready for that, and I was not expecting it, especially not with him, with Keith. And I think that the reason for that was that wasn't what my focus was on. That wasn't what my gaze was set on. And I think so many of us have our focus and our gaze set on a guy. And we're wondering why it's so frustrating, and we're wondering why it's so, discouraging, and why we feel so beat down. We always feel like we're not enough. And yes, there's a lot of different things that play into that. But I think a big thing that plays into that is because our gaze is not transfixed on Jesus. Our gaze is transfixed on that boy over there. And we're trying to figure out and do everything in our strength to get his attention. And to be the girl that he picks, and to be the girl that he says is the most beautiful, and to be the girl that he wants to marry. And some of us aren't even thinking that far. We just want a guy's attention, right? But no matter to what degree that is, the point is that you have somewhere along the way taken your gaze off of God and put it on a boy. And any time that we shift our gaze to something else, we make something else a little g God. And I know that's a really uncomfortable language, and that might make you feel like again, I always say this because it's so important to me. This is not me trying to shame you or make you feel guilty. It's just the truth, right? There's a reason that Jesus tells us to keep our eyes transfixed on him. There's a reason that we are told to lift our eyes to heaven. There is a reason that Peter started sinking when he was walking on the water and he took his eyes off of Jesus. It's because anytime we take our eyes off of him, we start sinking. You know why? Because anything that we put our gaze on, that we give that sort of attention to, that sort of trust to, that sort of weight to, makes a really crappy God. Any little g God is going to fail you. It's going to cause you to sink. It's going to cause you to stumble. It's going to cause you to feel insecure. It's going to cause you to feel, like you're not enough. And I don't know exactly how or when this happened, but I know this. I know that for me, when I had my gaze fixed on the boy, it's because I wanted him to fill in a gap. I wanted him to validate what I felt I was invalidated in. I wanted him to fix the things that I didn't know how to fix myself. I'm saying this out loud, and in hindsight, I'm like, I literally made him an idol. Like, I thought he was going to be the solution to all the problems. Do you want to know what's lonelier than being alone on Valentine's Day? Is being in the wrong relationship. You want to know what's lonelier than being in a season of singleness when your friends are all married? Is being in a miserable marriage. And I think so many of us aren't willing to wait for our Boaz. You know what I mean? We're not willing to wait for that man, and we're not willing to wait for God's best for us, because we don't actually believe that God is bringing his best for us. It's so funny because you read this story and it's like, man, Ruth, found favor in Boaz's eyes, and Boaz, his gaze fell on Ruth in this way. Like, she caught his attention because she was just doing what she needed to do. She was just doing the next best thing, being faithful to what was in front of her. She wasn't looking for Boaz, but found him by just doing what she needed to do. And I think, if we're honest, I think sometimes that feels too easy and too simple. I really do. I feel like there's two sides of the spectrum that we fall on in our culture and in our world today. And it's either we think it's a fairy tale, and I remember someone telling me, I know like you're waiting at your house doing nothing about your situation for the guy to come literally knock on your physical door at your home, and that's not going to happen. Like, you have to go out there. Like, you have to get out there. You're going to run into this guy. You're going to meet this guy. He's like, you're not going to be sitting in your living room one day and he's going to walk in the door and be like, where have you been? I've been like looking for you. And I think that's one side of the spectrum. Some of us kind of maybe believe in this fairy tale love where we don't have to do anything. I don't want to word this wrong. I think some of us just lean really far on the side of, well, I don't know why I'm not meeting anybody. I don't know why I'm not meeting a great guy. I don't know why I'm not meeting a Boaz, when it's like, well, where are you hanging out? What are you doing? Like, some of us are frustrated that we haven't met a guy, but we're just really chilling on the weekends, watching our Netflix shows, never leaving the house, unless it's like to go to those 2 places we visit, and then we come back and we're like, dude, when is this guy coming? Like, what's going on? Like, why won't God send him to the restaurant I eat at every week? And then I think some of us lean on the other side of the spectrum, and we think like, no, he's not coming, so I got to go find him. And I think there's a sweet spot, right? Like, there always is. Like, there's always a moderation. And I think that sweet spot is just knowing that you're worth being pursued, and you deserve being pursued. But also knowing that it doesn't have to be that complicated. And I think that in the world that we live in, and in the things that entertain us, and the things that we're told, and the way that our society operates, man, we just make everything so dang complicated. It's almost like we think that if it's not complicated, then it can't be right. And I think today what I want you to hear is, it's not complicated. It's not. And girls, I can say this, okay? We're girl to girl. Sometimes we make it complicated. And I'm not saying that boys do not have their part to play, but I'm saying this, okay? I'm going to give you a little story from high school, Sagan. I remember going to my older brother and being like, man, Jordan, like, this is before Keith, obviously. I just told him, I said, I don't know if this guy likes me or not. Like, he has my number. I gave him or whatever. He asked for my number, and I haven't heard from him in a couple of days, but I thought that we hit it off pretty well, and I don't understand why he hasn't followed up. And I don't know, though. I think he's into me, but he kind of, is talking to this other girl, but I don't know. I think I just kept telling him all these reasons why I thought this guy was into me, but then I would state something right after that of like, but here's why I think he's not. My brother looks at me and he goes, shout out Jordan if you're listening to this. He goes, Sagan, does he know your number? And I said, yeah. And he was like, all right. And he hasn't talked to you yet. He hasn't reached out. He hasn't asked you on a date. He hasn't. And I was like, well, no. And he said, okay, stop making excuses for him. If he liked you, you would know about it. And I was like, okay, ouch. And I think what I learned in that moment with my older brother back then, not so gently, maybe telling me that, was that it's not complicated. And sometimes we complicate it because we have our eyes fixed on one dude, and we're stubborn. Like, we want that guy. We've decided that that's God's best for us in that moment or in that season. And we get so caught up in him, and we fix our gaze on him, that it's like, no, this has to work. This has to happen. It has to be him. It has to be him. If it's not him, I don't know what I'm going to do. If it's not him, I don't know who I'm going to marry. If it's not him, you know what? If it's not him, there's someone else. And at some point, we have to stop making those excuses, and we have to know our worth, and we have to know who God made us to be, and we have to trust him, and we have to know that we're going to be okay without that guy. I think some of us really don't think that, but you are going to be okay without that guy. My favorite thing to tell girls is, you win either way. You're either going to end up with that guy, or You're going to end up with someone who's a better fit for you. And you're going to end up with that guy because he's going to go through what he needs to go through, and he's going to grow, and he's going to become the man that God created him to be. Or you're going to find someone who is that man that God created him to be, and it's going to be better. And you're going to be grateful that it didn't work out with that guy at that time. And so I just feel like sometimes we make it so complicated. And we want all these answers, right? We do this with God too. It's like we make things so complicated. I do this. I'm like, God, I just don't know if you want me doing this or you want me doing that, or you want to, how's this going to work out? How are we going to do this? And man, God's just like, man, Sagan, like, just do this next thing. Like that's been the most humbling thing lately, is that I am trying to be 5 steps ahead of God, and God is just telling me, hey, Sagan, just do this. And I'm like, yeah, I know. But what about this? What about this? What about that? Or if I do this and it turns into that, or if I do that and it turns into this. And God's like, hey, Sagan, just do this. And I think we all have something that God has told us to do, but we don't really like that he didn't tell us the answer to the thing we're asking, or he didn't tell us that to do the thing that we want to be doing right now, or he didn't give us clarity in the way that we thought we wanted it, or we think we need it right now. But guys, God has told you to do something. God has called you to do something, and the Bible says to do everything as if doing it for the Lord. So if you're in school, do everything as if doing it for the Lord. If you've given your yes to a club, do everything as if doing it for the Lord. If you have a good group of community and you know that God calls us to community, calls us to pour into each other, do everything as if doing it for the Lord. God has given you a very clear will right now. He has a revealed will that he has told you. He has told you to love him with all of your heart and to love others as you love yourself and to go and make disciples of all the nations. That's what he's told you to do. That's what he's told you to do. And notice how he didn't say, and pursue John a little bit on the side. And don't get me wrong, like, it's not wrong to be interested in a guy. It's not wrong to like a guy. I mean, the story of Ruth kind of winds down with Ruth shooting her shot, if you will, and literally going to the threshing floor and laying at the feet of this man Boaz. And basically back in that day, that was saying, hey, if you want me, I'm yours. And not in a sexual way. Like, there's nothing in the script, there's nothing in the Bible in that context that would lead us to think that that would be a sexual thing. It was just her way of posturing herself in humility to Boaz, saying, I'm yours if you want me. And I think, some of y'all asked the question of, is it okay for me to shoot my shot? And I talked about that on the last episode. And I think there's a totally appropriate way that honors God and is honoring to yourself to just be like, hey, you're a great guy. I would love to get to know you more. Like, here's my number. But then, girls, we have to be okay with letting it go at that point. We've got to learn how to believe that we are who God says we are, that we are as valuable as he says, that we are as beautiful as he says, that we are as worthy as he says, that we are all these things. We are cherished. We are captivating. We are wonderfully made. We have to start believing these things about ourselves so that, one, you don't end up settling for a relationship that you were never meant to be in. Because as a married woman, I can tell you this. You think what's scary is being single and alone your whole life. I think what's scarier is ending up in a marriage that you settled for and being miserable. Because marriage is hard. Marriage takes work. And I love marriage. I love my marriage. I love being married to Keith. It is a huge blessing. It is a gift. But also, even as a married woman, I see like the benefits and the blessing of singleness as well. They're both hard in different ways. They both grow you in different ways. They both refine you in different ways. And I think some of us have made marriage this like apex of the mountain. It's like we're climbing. We get to the top, we're married. But here's the deal. Life doesn't stop when you get married. And that should not be your apex. That should not be what you think life boils down to and builds up to. Some of you don't even think your life starts till you get married. And what's happened is you've made your whole life about marriage. And guys, marriage is a good thing. Like I said, it's a gift, but it's not end all be all. And marriage is not the goal. The goal is to love God with all your heart and love others as you love yourself. And I know that some of you, when I say that, you roll your eyes at me and you huff your breath at me because you're like, yeah, says the married woman. Says married woman. But yeah, says the married woman. Says the one in a season that some of you want to be in. So yeah, says her. Because I've been where you are, I've walked in your shoes, and I understand and I empathize. But I also want you girls to know there's so much more to life than just your relationship status. And I am fearful that some of you are willing to settle for something that is not God's best for you because you're so fixated on ensuring that you have that thing. You think you need to have that thing. You're terrified that if you don't grab that thing, if you don't grab that relationship, if you don't cling to the one you've got, that God may never bring something better. I pray none of you walk into a marriage like that. And yes, God can redeem, and yes, God can restore. And if you're listening to this as a married woman and you're like, that's my marriage right now, let me tell you something. Jesus is not beyond your marriage. Jesus, the power of his name, his healing, what he can do, his workings, his graciousness, his redemption, the Holy Spirit can fix and heal your marriage. You need to get down on those knees. You need to start praying. Do not be discouraged. Do not be dismayed. Your marriage is not too far gone. If you're in it, and you're realizing these things, then man, run to the Father. Run to the Father. But for my women who are not in a marriage, don't rush it. Don't force it. It's good and it's okay that you want those things. I don't like the version of that we've told ourselves is contentment sometimes. We've told, it's one of the most toxic things, I think, in just the dating culture in the modern Christianity is like, man, contentment is you pretending that you don't want something. Okay? No. Be truthful. Be vulnerable. Go to the Lord. He already knows what you want. You're not hiding it from him. You're doing yourself a disservice to act like you are. Go to him and tell him. And it says that the Lord gives us some of these desires in our heart. Not all of them. Don't use that as a cop-out to write out your desires that may not be from him. You need to take every desire to him and lay it at his feet. But man, God's for marriage. And he's for singleness. It's not bad that you want a husband, ladies. It's not bad at all. But now you have a decision on how you're going to go about that. And you get to choose how you're going to fight to honor the Lord in this season and how you're going to fight to not miss every single thing he has for you. Because it would be such a shame if you spent all your singleness just waiting for the guy. And I know that's really hard to not do. But I don't regret my singleness. When I started living it in the right way, when I started living it for God, I had countless memories of nights laughing with my girls, living with my friends. Like, I don't regret any of that. And I don't want you guys to miss out on what God has for you right in front of you because you've put your gaze on something that doesn't deserve or can it bear the weight that you've put on it. And I don't want you to settle. I don't want you to keep your gaze on that for so long that you start thinking that little g God has more weight than it has, and the enemy starts convincing you that, yeah, it does. You better lock it down. You better figure it out. You better hold tight to what you got. Like, no. My prayer would be that all of you girls watching this would get to walk into marriage with a confidence of, man, do I feel blessed to get to marry this man, to get to make this man my husband. That's what I want for you. I walked into my wedding day to marry Keith feeling like the luckiest girl on the planet. Not saying something because I'll share my story eventually on this podcast, and tonight's not the night, but eventually I will. And you will hear all the things and you will know that is God working a miracle that I walked into my wedding day like that. But what I'm saying is I pray that all of you get to walk into your wedding day with a calmness and a peace and a certainty that this is the man I'm choosing to do the rest of my life with. This is the man that I'm choosing to marry. And I am so grateful. And I feel so blessed that this gets to be my husband. That this gets to be my teammate. Because some of you have forgotten what kind of teammate you're looking for and what kind of teammate you're choosing and just what it is that you're choosing a teammate for. And being in a marriage, I can tell you, there would be nothing worse than being in a marriage and being miserable. Because you settled. Because you clung to something harder than you clung to Jesus. So, all that to say, I hope that you girls leave this episode understanding and wanting to know more about what God says about you and your worth and your beauty. And I hope that you have a new, fresh wind to wait and to fight faithfully and to wait and to realize that, man, you're not missing out on anything. Just because someone's in the season in front of you doesn't mean you're missing out. It means you need to stop comparing your timeline to theirs. That's all that means. Don't let the enemy give you that more weight than it is. That's all that means. All that means is it's like you're driving on the highway and cars are passing you and you're doing this. This is literally, and I know this is silly, but it is silly that we do this. You're going, oh my gosh, they passed me. Am I missing something? Oh my gosh, they passed me. Am I missing something? Oh my gosh, they passed me. Am I missing something? But you're driving the speed limit. The reality is you're just going at different speeds and nobody's missing anything. Nobody's missing anything. They just passed you. That's all. There's no race. There's no finish line that they're going to get to faster. You know, it's like how when someone passes you, but then like you both end up at the same stoplight and you're like, wow, that's kind of awkward because you were going really fast back there, but we ended up at the same place. That's how you need to start thinking about it. We're all ending up in heaven. You know? Like that's the finish line. It's actually just the beginning, but it's the finish line of life on this side of heaven. And you're not behind. Oh my gosh, you're not behind. You're right on time because God is never late and he's never early. He is right on time. And his timing is perfect. And if he gave you something before it was time, it would no longer be a good thing. We need to get our little eyes back on him and stop letting our eyes wander to the boy and to the timeline. Who cares where everybody else is? Why does that even affect you? That has nothing to do with you. That has nothing to do with you. Like that's the same logic of, well, since that girl's so beautiful, I must be ugly. Like that doesn't even make any sense. That's like saying, well, since the sunset's beautiful, the sunrise must be hideous. It doesn't make sense. You know why? Because those things were never meant to be compared. Your beauty should not be compared. Your beauty is beautiful because you are an original and there is one of you to ever exist and one of you will only ever exist. You're a limited edition. You're beautiful because of who made you and he said so. End of story, period, end of conversation. When you start questioning your beauty is when you start looking to the left or the right and you start comparing something that was never created to be compared. It's incomparable. The world's trying to make you think that it's comparable, but it's not. You're beautiful regardless and despite what anybody else says, because that's the truth. And in the same way, you're not missing out. You're not behind because you're just not, because you're not there yet. That's how I know, because you're not there. And you're the one that started making this race. You're the one that started comparing something that wasn't supposed to be compared. We got to stop that. We got to stop that. God has so much for you, a life for you, a life abundant for you. And we're dwindling it away by comparing to where we're not yet and what we don't have yet. I don't want to spend my whole life, I don't know about you, but I don't want to spend my whole life comparing to someone else's timeline. Some of my friends and I were just talking about this today. Like, what is contentment? Contentment's not pretending you don't want what someone else has. Contentment's not pretending you don't want something at all. Contentment is trusting God at its core. Contentment is trusting God, that He is good and He is good to you, that His timing is perfect, that He has not overlooked you, that He has not forgotten about you, that you didn't fall between the cracks, that He is for you, that He loves you, that He sees you, that He hears you, that He's with you. Contentment is trusting Him. So the way I want to end this podcast is just a very simple question. How much do you trust Him? How much do you trust Him with your relationships? How much do you trust Him with your future? How much do you trust Him with your present? That's a great question for me to ask myself. I love you, girls, and I hope you have a great rest of the week. And I will see y'all next week.